Hello and welcome to The Conversation. For nearly 70 years, audiences around the world have been captivated by Humphrey Bogart as world-weary nightclub owner Rick and Ingrid Bergman as the ravishing and mysterious Ilsa in the shadiest city in the world, Casablanca. But just what is the secret of Hollywood's greatest love story and most enduring film? Well, I am joined today by BBC broadcaster William Crawley as we explore the facts behind the fiction of Casablanca. We met in Cafe Harlem in Belfast, which had been transformed into Rick's place during the film festival for two sellout screenings of the film and a story analysis by William. I began by asking him what he thought was the contemporary appeal of Casablanca.
Well, when you look at some of the central themes of this film, and the casting is an example of that as well, the refugees amongst the cast and the question of intervention in a global war, these are very contemporary themes, aren't they? We deal with the question of refugees and migrancy today. We also deal with the question of the international community today and whether it should engage in places like Libya, Tunisia, Egypt and other places. So you might think Casablanca speaks right into those contemporary themes, but I actually think the popularity of Casablanca has nothing whatsoever to do with those contemporary resonances. The popularity of Casablanca would have been here anyway because the story is so universal. It's a love story, it's a thriller, it's a comedy, it's a story for everybody, and it's a story that's timeless.
I think timeless is a great way of putting it, because as time goes by, talk to me about the importance of the song in the evolution of Casablanca and in the enduring popularity of Casablanca.
Well, the song, as time goes by, is the oldest part of the film. It predates the film by 14 years or so, 1931. The song was written for a Broadway musical. And Murray Burnett, who's the co-author of the original play that became Casablanca, loved that song. He sang it all the way through his school and university days at Cornell University. So he wanted an excuse in a way to use the song, and the song influenced him greatly. And the song is really about the changing world and how so much changes in the world, but there are some things that don't change. There are some things which transcend time. And you might say, as time goes by, Casablanca transcends time, but Casablanca is about those things which are universal, those things which beat time. And they're not actually the moments of political history. They're very changeable. They're those private moments, those personal moments, those moments of love which lift you to another place, those moments which make you feel that time is forgotten even while you're living through a certain moment.
What's fascinating to me is Herman Hupfeld, who wrote the original song, Murray Burnett, who wrote Everyone Comes to Rick's, are both now largely forgotten. These are kind of anonymous figures in history of probably the most popular film of all time.
Yeah, and of course Murray Burnett fought most of his life to be remembered and to be given the credit that he deserved. And some of those who were involved in the play, scriptwriters like the Epstein brothers, like Howard Koch, who won an Oscar for it, denied him his place in this movie's history. And it's only in the recent past, just a few years before his death in 1997, that Murray Burnett began to get some recognition. And in 1991, the play he wrote was actually staged on the London stage in the West End.
Now, going back to the song, when you look at the lyrics of the song and we know the plot of the film and we know how the film has endured, when you look at that classic chorus line, it's still the same old story, a case of do or die, the world will always welcome lovers as time goes by. That's the whole film, isn't
Yes,
it?
It is
In four lines.
You must remember this way. My kiss is still a kiss. I saw you just a smile. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. You're not swaying back there. I demand sway. Thank you. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you. On that you can rely. No matter what the future brings, as time goes by.
That is the film, but I mean, there's more to the film, of course, than the love story. Because there is this moral quest faces the Bogart character, Rick, near the end of the film. Should I go or should I stay? Should I get involved? Should I stick my neck out, to use Rick's language, or not? And those were definitely moral questions that America was reflecting on. And as this play became a movie, and as the movie became a big screen hit, America was already sticking its neck out.
Tell us about what was the political move that really made a success of Casablanca?
Well, Hal Wallace, the producer, was being talked about across Hollywood at the time as the luckiest man in town, because he had a film which he had named Casablanca, and the Casablanca Conference, which is the meeting between Churchill and Roosevelt, takes place in 1942. But Casablanca was being invaded in November 1941. So the premiere of this film was the premiere of a film with the title all across the newsreels preceding the film. This was a film that was being talked about before it was a film.
Now, talk to me about the character of Rick Blaine. He's not the all-American hero. He's actually quite the opposite.
He's an anti-hero.
Yeah, which is maybe not what you expect from American cinema, and especially during this period. But you're right in saying that he somehow reflects the actual position that America found itself in at that time. So talk to me a little bit more about that.
He's a confusing character, isn't he? He's not the obvious character for a love story. Rick's a very broken person. It's quite clear from the start he's got a drink problem. He likes gambling. He's focused on money. He's focused on temporary things, not lasting things. And you wonder how he got to that point. Materialism, short-termism. Doesn't this sound like some of the darker side of the American dream? That short-termism, that materialism. And you get that aspect of the American heart, the American soul opened to America itself in the film. And I think Bogart's the perfect character to play it, because Bogart has this lined face. He's 41 years old when he plays this romantic lead. He has the face of a cynic. He can deliver these lines like he really means them, and you feel like he probably shares something of the personality of this character, Rick. But then there is a transformation, and it's the transformation that is the making of the film. The transformation of his character and in some of the other characters, but principally Rick, from someone who seems cynical and heartless to someone who realizes that he can grasp virtue. And that's a big moral lesson to the American public.
Now, it's fascinating to talk about Humphrey Bogart. Before this, Bogart was known as a craggy-faced gangster or a hard-boiled private eye, and he wasn't a romantic lead in any regard.
He wasn't before this.
No, certainly
He became an interesting possibility afterwards, though. And the pairing of Bogart with Bergman is interesting as well, because she at this point is 27 years old and he's 41.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that should not work here that does work.
Now, the interesting thing about Rick's Cafe American in the film is it's a kind of hideout for people on the run, all types of characters, all nationalities, all hiding out. And in a way, Casablanca, the film itself, kind of reflects that.
Well, this film is made up of refugees. If you look into the backstory of many of the bit players here, some of them who have no speaking roles at all, go back to their own stories. They come from countries that they have run away from. And in some cases were quite significant and distinguished actors on the stage and in the screen. So you have a film about refugees made up of a refugee cast, of refugee bit players. Even the director, Michael Curtiz, is a refugee from Hungarian poverty. I mean, this story is one of the most international casts that you can possibly assemble. And to do it at that time in Hollywood is fascinating.
I mean, we have Claude Rains, who's an Englishman. We have Peter Lorre, who's Hungarian, and Conrad Veidt. Tell me about him.
Well, Conrad Veidt is one of the most interesting cast members. He plays the part of the Nazi, Major Strasser, though he's dressed as a Luftwaffe officer. That's a little continuity error. He should be dressed in a Gestapo uniform. You should see those skull and bones on his uniform. But Strasser, the character of Strasser, is played by a man who was himself on the run from the Nazis because he had married a Jewish woman. And in fact, according to some accounts of his life, when he was asked to fill in official documentation, he described himself as Jewish in the documentation as a means of showing solidarity with his wife, and that came back to haunt him. So the great irony of Conrad Velt's life is that he is forever more associated with this Nazi character, when in his real life he associated himself with those who were being pursued and killed by those Nazi characters.
But obviously he must have felt that he was doing good by somehow portraying the Nazis as so evil that he was somehow reversing what had happened to him. Because it's quite a perverse thing, really, isn't it?
I think he was just glad to get the part. I think these were refugees.
Now, one of the key characters in the film is Dooley Wilson, who plays Sam, of course, the pianist. And we get this term, play it again, Sam, which is never actually said in the film. But tell us about Dooley Wilson.
Well, Dooley Wilson, the phrase that is used in the film is play it, Sam. But Dooley Wilson gets his name, Dooley, it's a nickname, from the fact that he played an Irishman earlier in his career and whited up his face for this part. And he sang a song in that production called Mr. Dooley. So he becomes Dooley Wilson. Now, he performs as time goes by. And of course, he is forever more associated with that song and with that film. Can you imagine anybody else performing as time goes by? Even though 50, 60, 70 recording artists have recorded it since, from Frank Sinatra to ZZ Top, they've all had a go at it. No one can top, in the public's estimation, Dooley Wilson's performance of it. And yet Max Steiner, who wrote the score for Casablanca, hated his performance of the song just about as much as he hated the song itself. He wanted the song erased from the script. He wanted to put in his own song, and they wanted to reshoot that both scenes where the song appears with his own composition. The only reason they didn't do that is that Ingrid Bergman had moved on to her next part, playing Maria in For Whom the Bell Tolls, and she'd had her haircut. Otherwise, if she hadn't had her haircut, we'd have had Max Steiner's song instead. We'd never know of Dooley Wilson in that film.
Now, that would be a total tragedy.
It's one of those what-if moments, a counterfactual history.
Yeah, so
if Ingrid Bergman had not had her haircut.
Well, thank God she did. That's all we can say.
Let's see her for hairdressers.
Michael Curtiz is a really interesting character. I've had a lot of discussions with film academics who talk about the auteurs of Hollywood. They talk about Howard Hawks and John Ford, but Curtiz is never in that bracket.
No.
But when you look at the films that he made, Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Angels with Dirty Faces, White Christmas, King Creole with Elvis, and The Comancheros with John Wayne, it's an extraordinary career.
Well, the diversity is part of the problem, isn't it? So on the one side, that's an argument against his authorship, in that if you look at these films, you can't detect the sensibility that unites them. You can't detect the single eye across them, because they are very workable pieces. They're very jobbing pieces. But I have seen it argued that you can detect a thread, a DNA throughout those films that is an argument for authorship in moral dilemmas. Casablanca has a moral dilemma, and many of those films are films where a central character has a transforming dilemma situation, and they've got a kind of moral quest dimension to them. But on the other hand, you can see the debate going another direction. Name me a film that doesn't.
I know, but you can't make Casablanca and just be a jobbing director. Do you know what I mean? To me, it's incredibly harsh. You know.
No, you can be a great director, but not an auteur.
But I just feel that Curtiz is ripe for revisionism in some regard. Now, I want to talk to you about the script. One thing that you absolutely cannot deny when you watch Casablanca is the sharpest script, the pointed dialogue, the memorable quotes from the film. I mean, what stands out for you from that?
And it would have to be said that much of that is the Epstein brothers, rather than Murray Burnett. Many of those quotes that stand out for audiences, when audiences can quote them coming out of the film, here's looking at you, kid, and
round up the usual suspects.
Round up the usual suspects, and that scene at the very end. Maybe not now, maybe not, but someday, and you'll regret this.
We'll always have Paris.
We'll always have Paris, and even just viewing the film again the other night, I heard the character played by Claude Rains, the Vichy French officer, saying, "What goes on in Casablanca stays in Casablanca." That must be the origin of what goes into her stays into her. So it's the most quotable film in the history of Hollywood. I would think that's an easily defensible claim.
The film was successful. Casablanca was successful when it was released, and it obviously won Academy Awards and then gained a cult status among other filmmakers and audiences as time has went on. But what do you think, looking at it now from the point of view of nearly 70 years?
The first thing I would say about the success of this film is it was an unexpected success in many ways. So unexpected that Michael Curtiz, when he won Best Director for this film, didn't even have a speech written. This was one of many, many films that were made in the Warner Brothers lot. But, it was a reasonable budget. It was not... they weren't looking for this to be the greatest film they ever made or the most memorable film they ever made. So let's observe that first of all. No one expected it to be so successful 70 years later. Even that year, no one expected it to be so successful. So that cries out for explanation. Why is it so successful? And I think there we go back to, yes, when you look at the individual elements of it, a pretty decent director. I think a very decent director.
Good.
A very decent cast. Shot in the back lot of Warner Brothers, decent enough locations, a decent script, not the best script you've ever read by any means. In fact, when you look at any single element of Casablanca, you can always find a better director, a better cast, a better script, better locations, better song even. But Casablanca is greater than the sum of those individual parts. There's some kind of cinematic alchemy that happens in the mix of all of those parts, which unites, and I think this is the key, with a universal story. This is an archetypal universal story, which has the elements of quest and thriller, love story, comedy, war propaganda movie, and 5 other genres all spliced together.
It's the most collaborative of all films. If you wanted a film to show you how cinema works as a collaboration into greatness, Casablanca would be the perfect example. But
well, you're right. It starts with a song in a Broadway musical called Everyone's Welcome, 1931. It moves into a play in 1940, 1941. Everybody Comes to Rick's Place. It turns into a screenplay with many authors across that, and it turns into a production. And then it turns into something iconic that is greater than itself.
Rick's moral dilemma at the end of the film. Now, talk to me about that, because what Rick does at that moment is spiritual in a way.
It is, yeah.
It's beyond a love story.
Right. What happens there is essentially an ascension moment, to use theological language, because Rick is lifted beyond himself. He ascends beyond himself. He transcends his own natural and very understandable human emotions. He has to make a choice between love, the love he has for this woman, and a sense of duty, sacrifice, to do the right thing in spite of his emotional needs and wants and desires. And he uses language that we associate actually with the person of Jesus in the New Testament, because Jesus says words which come out of the mouth of Rick Blaine in this film. Where I am going, you cannot follow, Jesus says to his disciples before the ascension. And Rick says that as well, and he means it. Where he's going to be sticking his neck out. So there's a kind of baptism of this character of Rick, from a guy who is cynical to a guy who is sacrificial. That's the transformation that he makes. And he makes that key move to sacrificial choice at the airport, where he's just about not to ascend the plane.
No, he doesn't go any higher.
His ascension is paralleled by his lack of ascension in an airplane.
Casablanca was obviously shot nowhere near Casablanca, but on the back lot in Burbank in Hollywood. It's absolutely nothing to do with Morocco really at all. And in a sense, that's right about the film and the film's title, etc., that this is really a film about America, not really about Casablanca.
Well, even the word Casablanca means White House. And you could see this film as a moral parable about what America should do in the world of 1940, 1941, 1942. And the film starts its life before Pearl Harbor, before December 1941, when America was dragged into a global conflict. And by the time the film comes out, it takes on a new meaning, because the film now, instead of being an argument for getting involved in that conflict, it's an argument for the rightness of American involvement in the conflict. So yes, I think that's absolutely clear. This film is about America and America's place in the world.
Now, I wanted to ask you finally, one of the highlights of the evening and the screenings and the story analysis which you did was your singing off the song. You being play it again, Sam, quite literally. So tell me about that. What was that like, and getting the whole audience to sing this song?
Well, I think they didn't. Well, how can you do Casablanca without seriously looking at that song as time goes by? And I can't think of a song more closely associated with the film than this one, or a song more closely associated with Hollywood cinema than this one. So, and it's also a crooner song. You can talk your way through it. You can lounge your way into it. Yeah. It was a delight to sing it, actually, with Ivan Black, my black pianist, on the evening. He's as close as we got to Julie Wilson. And the audience couldn't help themselves. They didn't require any prompting at all. They just went for it.
But it's still the same old story. A fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. The world will always welcome lovers as time goes by. Thank you. Good night. We'll always have Harlem.
More than anything, when I want to talk about Casablanca, what I want to talk about is why it is so successful. Because it shouldn't be, in a way. It really shouldn't be. And yet it is.
William, pleasure to talk to you.
Brian, as always. Shall we sing it together now? You must remember this. A kiss is still a kiss. There you go.
Right. Thanks very much, William.
It's the definition of a classic. We can quote it, but we can't sing it.